All right, so everybody's aware exploratory reflection 2 is due tonight, and we're aware of what we have to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're aware of the directions, all is well. Okay. So for Tuesday, you're going to be reading the Virginia Woolf essay, Shakespeare's Sister, in Reading the World. Page numbers are up there. I think it's the one right after the Douglas essay.
Mm-hmm.
And submit vocab words for the Woolf reading. Now, if I don't think this is the case for anyone in this class yet, but if you have already reached 10 points with the vocab words, then you don't have to keep submitting them, right? You'll get more participation credit, but you won't get more points on the vocab assignments for continuing to submit words after you've reached 10 points. That's the maximum for that assignment. But it's a good habit to be in anyway. So does anybody have any questions about anything before we get started? Okay, so the last couple of texts that we've focused on have dealt with issues of justice and right and wrong, right? So what we're going to be talking about over the next week and a half or so are texts that are focused primarily on issues of education, literacy, and identity, and the way these three ideas intersect, right? So I think the way I want to introduce this is by starting to kind of take apart the contemporary idea of what education is and what we expect from it, right? So I want to, if you take out your Reading the World book and turn to page 515, what we see here is a set of ads for a College of Applied Arts and Technology in Canada. And what I'd like you to do is sit with these 4 advertisements for a second. These appeared mostly on the Toronto subway. And just tell me what you notice. Like, in particular, any common elements you notice running through all 4 ads.
That looks like teenagers.
Okay, yeah. Teenagers. And let's break that down a little further. What do we notice about these teenagers in these ads?
Well, they're not doing anything productive.
Okay, yeah. They're doing things that certainly at least don't look productive, right? There's one guy just sitting on the couch with his shirt off. There's another guy fiddling with his phone. And there's a girl shoveling SpaghettiOs into her mouth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so they're not doing anything obviously productive.
On the last picture, I see the pizza box in their hands, but I really
Uh-huh.
don't see the person.
Yeah, that one is slightly different from the others. So let's kind of sit on that one for a minute and focus on that last, right? What else do we notice about the kids in these pictures?
They look young.
Okay, yeah, they look young. Some of them look very young, right?
Mm-hmm.
How are they dressed?
Comfortable.
Yeah, comfortable, casual dress, right? Now, how do the words in the ads relate to the pictures? Would we assume, looking at these pictures, that these were ads for a college?
Like the words are kind of like, motivational,
Uh-huh.
but compared to the picture that goes along with them, it's not really, great.
Okay. Why not?
It's like, I don't know, like on the second one, he'll make a name for himself besides Lube Dude.
Yeah.
It doesn't really show, he doesn't really look like he has any motivation to make a name, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so we've got, 3 teenagers, none of whom look particularly motivated to do anything other than, like, sit on the couch watching TV, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a mismatch here between the words, right, and the image. So are the words trying to get us to look at the person in the image differently?
They're trying to.
Okay, well, whether it works or not is debatable, right? But the whole idea is, this person sitting on the couch shoveling canned pasta into her mouth, right, is the new boss, right? Right. So like this is what the next generation of leaders is going to look like, right? So, is this marketed, do you think, at young people or at their parents?
Parents.
Why their parents?
Because even though, like, they're, lazy now, it doesn't mean that they're always going to be lazy. Or,
Well,
they're just chilling now,
Mhm.
but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean, like, they haven't been doing anything to,
But the words also suggest, the words part of the picture suggest that these kids aren't actually lazy, right?
right.
However you perceive them now. So what the ad is trying to do is line up with the self-perception of Canadian teenagers, right? As like it may not look like I'm doing anything productive to you, but that doesn't mean that I'm lazy or stupid, right? And in a way, kind of telling you you're fine as you are, and kind of like accepting you as you are, instead of like presenting that usual image of college as aspirational, right? As something that is going to alter you. And I do kind of like, I kind of want to sit with this idea for a minute, right? The notion of, well, let me try to put it to you this way. What's the good of college for somebody who's already fine as they are? What good does college do you if you're already, quote unquote, fine as you are?
It furthers your knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
You get more freedom.
Uh-huh. But you have to pay for the privilege, right?
Yeah.
So there's an assumption baked into these ads, right? That you don't need to be changed, right? That college shouldn't have to change you. You're already a genius, right? You're already an Einstein. You're already the new boss. So, whatever this college is selling, right? It's not really trying to sell itself as changing or shaping you in any way, right? It seems to think you've already got there on your own. And I think that this is kind of related to a particularly North American idea of education. And I'm just gonna draw slightly on personal experience here for a moment, right? It's been my own experience over the past couple of years that more and more students, and in particular more and more parents of students, have been expecting that you're going to go through your 4 to 6 years, come out the other end with a career qualification, and you will have undergone no other significant changes, right, apart from being a little bit older, right? Whatever you believed coming into college, you should still be believing when you come out the other end. And I kind of think like I don't think that college should encourage you to adopt any particular political or religious or whatever ideology, right? But I do think that it should actually encourage you to look at yourself and your world differently. And I think that one of the things that this ad is selling is a kind of fantasy in which you can get your career qualification and then just be, right? It doesn't have to change you in any way because you're already great. Now, related to this idea, I want to look for a minute at an ad that plagued my existence about 12 years ago. It was always on late at night, like if I was watching old episodes of The Simpsons at like 1 a.m. So you can actually tell a lot about who or what an ad is trying to target based on when it airs, right? So for example, if you're watching TV during the day, what kinds of things do you tend to see ads for? Okay, yeah, you see a lot of ads for things like toys, right? And Happy Meals and things that are aimed at children, right?
And then medicine for the old.
Yeah, collectible coins, reverse mortgages, like retrofitting your bathroom to put rails on everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you find ads that are aimed at young parents who are stuck at home with a little kid, right?
Me and my friend were just talking about this video, trying to remember the song.
Yep.
I knew it. Like, it would come on TV, like, before.
Oh, so they were marketing this directly to teenagers too. See, I wasn't watching Teen Nick, so I never saw it there. But
I was watching Teen Nick in second grade. So.
Sure. Well, I was seeing this, like late at night during episodes of The Simpsons, which suggests that the target audience was unemployed people in their 20s and 30s who didn't have to get up early in the morning, right? So let's just sit with this. It's only about a minute long. I'm going to warn you, Ron, because you're not familiar with it, I don't think. You haven't seen this before? The jingle is extremely annoying.
It will get in your head.
It's going to get stuck in your head for days.
I'm singing it already.
Yeah. But I want you to think again about the assumptions that this is making about education, right? And the assumptions it's making about your attitudes towards education.
Nostalgia.
I'm looking for an hourly wage. I went to high school, didn't do great. Still I gotta make more cash. Education is what I'm looking at. When I get a degree, I will make a bigger salary. So now I've got to see which college is right for me. I went on the internet and found education connection. I took some free tests to find out my direction. I'm taking my classes online, getting my degree on my own time. Education connection matched me with the right college for free. Get connected for free, free with education connection. Get connected for free, free with education connection.
All right. Oh, barf. Okay. So let's kind of break down the basic plot of this, right? So what happens in this commercial? What's the story that's told here?
She didn't do great in high school.
Yeah.
She wants to make more money.
Uh-huh.
So she goes online and finds Education Connection to find the right college for free.
Yes. Now, it doesn't say you can attend for free, right?
Right.
But, yeah, you can use the service, right? You can take a free test that will help you connect with an online college, right? So what are the assumptions here about education? What is the primary purpose of education as defined by this ad?
Make more money.
Yes, when I get a degree, I will make a bigger salary, right? So yes, make more money.
Maybe get a new marker.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the markers in here or the board. This particular board gets really dirty, and the markers all seem to run out quicker in this room as well for some reason. I don't understand why, but it makes me a little nuts. Okay, so the basic purpose here is to make more money, right? And should it be hard? Should it be challenging in any way, shape, or form?
No.
No. Yeah. Education should be easy, right?
You go at it on your own time.
Yes, it should be easy and convenient, right? Now, if your classes are really easy, are you actually learning anything in all likelihood?
No.
Probably not, right? But this is, but this has nothing to say about classes, right? Or about quality of programs or anything like that. Education Connection was basically a front for a bunch of for-profit diploma mills. All it's doing is selling you the qualification and telling you it's easy to get, right? But this particular kind of market logic seeps into even the ways our public educational institutions present and market themselves, right? At least to a certain extent. So I'm going to show you our own college website. What's the very first thing we see? Apply for free, right? Apply free for a limited time, right? We've got great big letters over here, right over future students. We've got the button over here. And it's even situated over a pathway going off into a lovely tree-lined avenue, right?
Like alumni.
Yeah. Yeah, alumni right here. This is your road, right? So, I mean, on the one hand, like, I will say, this is actually, like, I'm actually kind of surprised for GSW how rhetorically effective this image is and how well thought out it seems to
I
be.
didn't even, like, think of it like that, because obviously I've been on the page and seen it.
Uh-huh.
I didn't even, like, see it like that.
Uh-huh. But the same basic idea here, right, is that it should be easy and convenient. At the very least, to apply for college, right? And, you know, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that anybody who wants to go to college should be able to go to college. But I do think that the way we think about education in the U.S. is often unproductive and often actually kind of leads to less than desirable outcomes. And yeah, we scroll down. And then when we see other things that the university is doing to market itself, though, right, we see that this is actually quite different from what's going on the Education Connection site here, right? So, for example, you know, when we talk about the at a glance here, right, what kind of information do they give us?
You know, teacher to student ratio is low, which means you'll have more interaction with the teacher.
Yeah.
You don't have a big class
Mm-hmm.
size, and you know,
Yeah.
you can get whatever. You go into any program you can think of, since we have so many.
Yeah, we have 60 plus certified programs, right? It's all accredited. Student-teacher ratio is low, so odds are you'll get plenty of one-on-one attention, and class sizes, at least on average, are small, right? Now, averages tend to be deceptive, right? Because you have a class like this that has 3 people enrolled in it, and then, you know, you might have a sociology intro course with 60 people in it, right?
Yeah.
But when you average 60 and 3, right, you get 20. So, I do want to note, too, what we see in the pictures here in the website here, right? What's going on in these pictures?
You got a girl posing with
Uh-huh.
you for the list of majors.
Yeah.
Tuition and cost, you have people working,
Uh-huh.
working hard.
Yeah.
Graduate programs, nurses on a, looks like a dummy,
Yeah.
you know, insinuating that they have a good nursing program.
Uh-huh. So yeah, we see on the one hand, you have people doing like job-related stuff, right? And we see students working in a classroom, right? This is the kind of, but what kind of classroom is this? Do we know where this is or what's going on here?
Yeah, it looks like a high school class.
What do the little generator boxes here maybe indicate? It might just be hard to see on the screen. It's a science lab. Yeah, these students are working in a science lab. And here we have a student. She's not just posing against the wall. She's posing, holding a textbook, right? So there is at least here some attention to the academic experience. And when we scroll down to look at these little cane spotlights, right? They talk about where they have a picture of a student. Generally, it seems these cane spotlights feature a photogenic young woman. And they get a little, about me kind of thing, right? So Ayana Hardin is a music major, and what they say about GSW and why they chose it tends to vary, right?
I'm caught up on the ooey gooey chocolate chip cookie feeling.
Yeah. So this is suggesting a kind of like that she chose this place because of a feeling of belonging, right?
Mm-hmm.
That this place felt right. That there are other students in the spotlight who, choose to say because of a particular program or for academic reasons, right? So this kind of varies across, and I think that's also quite intentional.
Yeah, they pick and choose the people to make their school, to make school better.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
I choose it because it's cheap. And
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, like, most of our student body chooses this place because it's inexpensive and close to home. That that's. But in the dome, they don't want to hear that. And it's funny to when we get these news articles as well. Like, these also rotate when you reload the site, just like the little spotlights. But they're usually focused on things like enrollment increases, or some kind of economic stat, right? Like that we're named a best value college, something like that, right? So while we do have in the middle of the page this nod to academics, like what you'd actually be doing here, most of what's on the website is still kind of caught up in this language of convenience and economic outcomes, right? And the reason that I wanted to talk about this, the reason I wanted to kind of focus on this first, is because I think this is actually kind of really relevant to some of the ideas that Frederick Douglass is talking about in his essay.
that was one of the most easiest reads.
Okay.
It's like I could understand it very
Good. Yeah, there's not a lot of difficult language in the Douglass essay. And indeed, Douglass was aiming at a broad audience. So he really didn't want to go on crazy rhetorical flights that were going to confuse people, right? But the basic idea, what's the basic idea that Douglass is trying to communicate? What's his basic argument?
that people really didn't educate slaves because it would, make them realize the injustices that they're facing, like Douglass did.
Exactly, yeah. If you educate people and you educate them well, they become aware of their situation, right? And they become also often desirous of change. Right. This is kind of not unlike, if we think back to the Martha Nussbaum essay that we read early in the class, right? Nussbaum was talking about education for democracy versus education for profit, right? And education for profit was very much kind of focused on technical skills and, career skills. And things that, maybe teach you how to work a machine or a computer, something like that, right? But that don't really encourage you to question your life or your surroundings. Whereas education for democracy that's designed to build citizens is designed exactly to make you question what's going on around you. And hopefully to try to improve it, right? Now, I think there can be a balance between the two. But let's try to dig into Douglas's specific arguments here and see maybe where he might fall in this. Now, what's unusual about Douglas's process of education?
He learned to read before he learned how to write.
He learned how to read before he learned how to write, yeah. Which is not in itself necessarily unusual, right? Most of us actually do learn to read before we can write. But think about this in terms of your own education. Right? How is your education largely proceeded? And I realize I might be making assumptions about how you've been educated up to this point, right?
He learned his ABCs first,
Mm-hmm.
just like, we did.
Sure.
But he had to teach himself.
Yeah. That's the kicker, right? He doesn't have any formal education. He has to teach himself most of what he knows, right? He's given a few basics in reading and writing at the beginning of this piece, right? Or in reading anyway. He learns the alphabet from his master's wife. But then she stops teaching him. And everything else he has to figure out, either on his own or through tricking people into teaching him, right? So Douglas is predominantly self-educated. Right. He's educated outside of any formal structures, right? And why is this necessary? Why is the only way he's going to get educated self-education?
Because he's a slave.
Yeah. And it was illegal to even teach a slave to read, right? So, reading and writing for Douglas actually do serve practical purposes, but also help him expand his notion of what's possible, right? And expand his knowledge of the world around him. So in terms of practical outcomes, what's the major practical outcome he gets from learning how to read?
What do you mean by practical out?
Well, what does learning how to read allow him to do? Or what does it allow him to learn about?
How badly he's being treated, him and
Mhm.
everybody else, for, no reason.
Yeah,
They
I
all
mean,
do the same.
yeah, he learns to compare his condition to other people's, right?
Mhm.
Oh, crap. He learns arguments against slavery that he can use in his own defense, And he learns about abolition movements, right? So he actually does get a lot of practical, useful information that addresses his own situation from learning to read. And now writing actually gives him an even more concrete practical outcome. What is he able to do once he can write well?
He can write his own pass.
Yeah. He can forge a pass that allows him to get out of Baltimore and to get out of a slave state into a free state, right?
Baltimore, Massachusetts?
Baltimore, Maryland.
I was about to say.
Well,
North.
you know what? It's funny you mention that too, because we tend to regard slavery as being strictly Southern,
Yeah.
when in fact, at least initially, it was legal throughout all 13 colonies, except Georgia when it was founded. Slavery was actually illegal in Georgia when it was founded, and then after General Oglethorpe died, Oglethorpe, yep. Yeah, General Oglethorpe, the founder of the colony, was opposed to allowing the importation of slaves, in part because this was founded as a debtor's colony, right? And the people who were brought here as colonists were supposed to be working off their own debts.
Oh.
So it wasn't necessarily out of the goodness of his heart that he opposed bringing slaves here. It was because the people who were here were supposed to be working the land themselves.
Just makes me just love Georgia so much.
Anywho,
Yeah.
so in the 1780s, most of the northern states passed gradual abolition laws. And new states that were admitted to the Union above the Mason-Dixon line were added as free states where slavery was illegal. However, gradual emancipation meant that in some of these states, like if you were born a slave in New Jersey in 1780 and you lived to 1865, you were still a slave in 1865, right?
So like they didn't get like grandfathered in or whatever.
Nope. Yeah, there were still enslaved people living in various northern states, especially New York and New Jersey, by the end of the Civil War. Not to mention that usually if people were caught, if escaped slaves were caught in northern states, they were usually simply returned. So it's not like people were necessarily escaping to a place where they were going to be absolutely free, right? But nonetheless, yeah, he's able to forge a pass, and he's able to get, he goes to Massachusetts and founds an abolitionist newspaper there. So what I'd like to do now is kind of like dig into the specifics of his argument, right? And this will help us draw out some of those intangible benefits that he draws out of this as well. So let's start by looking at the relationship between Douglas and his master's family. So can I get one of you to read for us the paragraph on page 23 that starts with, "I lived in Master Hugh's family about 7 years." Thank you.
I lived in Master Hugh's family about 7 years. During this time, I succeeded in learning to read and write. In accomplishing this, I was compelled to resort to various stratagems. I had no regular teacher. My mistress, who had kindly commenced to instruct me, had, in compliance with the advice and direction of her husband, not only ceased to instruct, but had set her face against my being instructed by anyone else. It is due, however, to my mistress to say of her that she did not adopt this course of treatment immediately. At first, she lacked the
Depravity.
indispensable to shutting me up in mental darkness. It was at least necessary for her to have some training in the exercise of irresponsible power to make her equal to the task of treating me as though I were a brute.
Okay, so a couple of bits I want to pick out of here, right? So first off, what's a brute?
Like, dumb.
Okay, yeah, we usually use this word now to refer to somebody who is kind of big and stupid and rude, right? The reason we use this word to refer to that kind of person is because what brute actually means, or what its original meaning was non-sentient animal. Right, so a brute is an animal that lacks the capacity to reason, right? Which in 1845 was what people thought about basically any animal, right? A dog was a brute, a horse was a brute, a cow was a brute, so on and so forth, right? So when he says she treats him as a brute, he means she treats him like an animal. Now, what do we notice here about the language that he uses to describe his mistress and his mistress's behavior? Do you notice any particular words or phrases that pop out at you?
The property?
Yeah, depravity. What's depravity mean? What does it mean to be depraved?
Is it the same as like deprive?
No, to deprive is to deprive someone of something is to just keep something away from them, right? So she is depraved enough to deprive him of education, right? But someone who is depraved, right? Right, depravity is a lack of any moral sense. So, Douglas is associating this particular word, this particular idea, with the slave owner's policy of keeping their slaves ignorant, right? She at first lacks the depravity to shut him up in mental darkness. So, let's think about that for a minute. The phrase, shut me up in mental darkness. What does this sound like? What kind of situation is being described metaphorically here?
Like he's locked away
Yeah.
in a cage or something?
Yeah, like a prisoner, right? Good. Right? Ignorance keeps him a prisoner. And it's through this the depravity of this policy, right, of not educating slaves that he is kept prisoner. Not just as a slave, but as an illiterate, ignorant person, right? And I think there's something to note here as well in the reasons that his mistress ceases to instruct him. Why does she stop teaching him?
Her husband made her.
Yeah. She's following her husband's instructions, right? And I think we can relate this to themes that we saw in Audre Lorde's piece as well, right? There's that part at the end of Audre Lorde's essay where she's, addressing other female academics, right? And, the reasons why they don't teach texts by black women or texts by lesbian women or things of that nature, right? And, one of the things they say, well, what would my husband or my supervisor say, right? So, to an extent here, the mistress here is being painted as much a prisoner of almost as much a prisoner of the system as he is, right? They are all subject to the will of Master Hugh. And I think it's also worth spending a little time here on how he draws this out in the next paragraph. So, Ron, can you read the next paragraph for us on page 23? So, my mistress was, as I have said.
My mistress was, as I said, a kind, tender-hearted woman, and in the simplicity of her own soul she commends. When I first went to live with her, to treat me as she supposed one human being ought to treat another, and entering upon the duties of a slaveholder, she did not seem to pursue that I sustained to her the relations of her mere chattel, and that for her to treat me as a human being was not only wrong, but dangerously so. Slavery proved as injurious to her as it did to me. When I went there, she was
Pious.
Warm, tender-hearted woman. There was no sorrow or suffering for which she had not a care. She had bread for the hungered, clothes for the naked, and comfort for every mourner that came within her reach. Slavery soon proved its ability to divest her of these heavenly qualities. Under its influence, the tender heart became stone, and the lamb-like disposition gave her to one of the tiger-like fierceness. The first step in her downward course was in her ceasing to instruct me. She now commenced to practice her husband's precepts.
Mm-hmm.
She finally became even more violent in her opposition than her husband himself. She was not satisfied with simply doing as well as he had commanded. She seemed anxious to do better. Nothing seemed to make her more angry than to see me with the newspaper. She seemed to think that her lay the danger here. I had her rush at me with a face made up of all fury and snatched from me a newspaper in a manner that fully revealed her apprehension.
Mm-hmm.
She was that woman, and a little experience soon demonstrated to her satisfaction that education and slavery was incompatible with each other.
Okay, so what's the central kind of irony that Douglas is pointing out in this paragraph?
Slavery made her evil.
Okay, yeah. She is as warped by the system as he is, right? That you have someone who was a kind and tender-hearted person who treated him like a human being, but when she's given absolute power over him, right, she becomes as tyrannical as anyone else. So yeah, there is this argument here that slavery warps both the slave and the master, right? And that a person with otherwise good qualities who is given power over slaves will find those good qualities basically going to like fizzle away, right? Now, it's also interesting. He first says that she treated him as one human being ought to treat another, and that she didn't realize she was supposed to treat him as chattel. Do you know what chattel means? Okay, so chattel is a word that means livestock. So we can see a theme here emerging, right? A kind of binary between human and animal. And, what constitutes someone as fully human rather than what makes them an animal, right? And I think that he associates being human less with intelligence and more with feeling, right? That to be human is to be in sympathy with the sufferings of other people, to care about what happens to other people, and to treat them as people. Whereas animal is associated with cruelty and ignorance. Now, what else do we note about this paragraph? What conclusion has his master's wife come to by the end of this paragraph?
Education and slavery were incompatible.
Uh-huh. And does he agree? Does he think she's right about that?
Towards the end, yeah,
Uh-huh.
because it's creating a burden upon him. So
Uh-huh.
much so that he wants to kill himself.
Yeah. He thinks that she's absolutely right. The people who want to keep slaves ignorant do so because they understand that if slaves are no longer ignorant, if they are educated, then they will want their freedom, right? They will want to change their status. And it will thus lead to an alteration of the status quo, right? So, yeah, I mean, he does think slaves should be educated, but it's also because he thinks slaves should be free, right? But yeah, he fully agrees that slavery and education are incompatible with each other. And why do you think she gets so angry specifically when she sees him with newspapers?
Because newspapers talk about current events and
Mm-hmm.
things going on that
Yep.
the slaves shouldn't know about.
Exactly. Right. A newspaper in the hands of someone like Douglas is more dangerous than a book, right? A book might, talk about things that happened, long, long ago, or, might, be an entirely fictional story. Whereas a newspaper is dealing usually with the here and now. And is basically kind of like a means of expanding his world, right? Beyond the confines of that house. Now, the way his life, apart from the fact that learning is kept from him, in terms of his material conditions in the house, how bad does his life sound? Does it sound like he's beaten or otherwise punished?
And it really doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't talk about any violence that he suffers at the hands of his master or mistress, right? And it seems like he is also trusted to a certain extent.
To go in rooms.
Yeah, and there's plenty of food available, right?
And if he was in a room for long, they didn't expect him of stealing anything. They thought he was reading.
Yeah. That's the thing they don't trust him about, right?
Right.
Is that they don't trust him to not learn things. But he seems to be trusted with stuff, and to leave the house on errands, right, and to watch the house when they're away. So there has been a kind of traditional line of argument that has suggested that most slaves didn't have it all that badly if they weren't physically beaten, and that this somehow kind of justifies the system, right? So there's a French anthropologist by the name of Claude Meillassoux, and I'm probably going to spell his name wrong. But I think it's spelled like that. And Meillassoux makes a distinction between what he calls the condition and the state of slavery. So the condition is essentially the physical living conditions of a particular slave, right? Is the slave treated with brutality? Are they treated humanely? Are they given enough to eat? Are they given a nice place to sleep? So on and so forth, right? State, however, refers to the slave's legal status as property. And Meillassoux argues that we tend to confuse the two, right? That we too often forget that even if an individual slave, or even all the slaves in a particular place were treated fairly well, right? Bless you. That their legal status is still essentially that of non-persons, right? That they're still not allowed to choose where to live, how to dispose of their time, right? They have no future prospects, right? And cannot make decisions or choices for themselves, regardless of how much bread they're given or how nice a house they're given to live in, right? So that it's really that this legal status as property that's the issue here. And that is the thing that Douglas is straining against, right? Not so much how he's treated by his master and mistress, but the fact that he is constrained in this place with this family, who are not his own family, for life, right? He's not just shut up in mental darkness, right? He's also shut up in this house in Baltimore, unable to decide how to dispose of the rest of his life, right? And I think, like this, he keeps repeating the problem that weighs on him so heavily at the age of 12 is, this notion of being a slave for life. That this is not a temporary condition, right? This is not something that will pass. This is something that is, for him, legally permanent, unless he can find a way out of it. And literacy and education are his way out, right? Even though learning more doesn't necessarily make him happier. So if you look on page 24, for example, and he's got these books on it, these books that he's got a hold of. It says the child of his master and mistress, his old school books. Right? I was now about 12 years old, and the thought of being a slave for life began to bear heavily upon my heart. Just about this time, I got hold of a book entitled The Columbian Order. Every opportunity I got, I used to read this book. Among much of other interesting matter, I found in it a dialogue between a master and his slave. The slave was represented as having run away from his master 3 times. The dialogue represented the conversation which took place between them when the slave was retaken the 3rd time. In this dialogue, the whole argument in behalf of slavery was brought forward by the master, all of which was disposed of by the slave. The slave was made to say some very smart as well as impressive things in reply to his master, things which had the desired though unexpected effect, for the conversation resulted in the voluntary emancipation of the slave on the part of the master. So let's look at this imaginary conversation as a model for Douglas's thought, right? What does he find so inspiring about this?
A slave stood up to his master
Yeah.
and ran away 3 times.
Yeah, on the one hand, yeah, we have an escaped slave.
He gets emancipated at the end of it.
Yeah. And how is it the slave manages to get emancipated?
His words.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, through the formation of clever arguments, right? The formation of through clever use of language. The slave is able to gain his own freedom. Now, we can compare this to previous attitudes towards rhetoric and texts we've read in the past. If we think, for example, what did Plato believe about rhetoric and argument? Do we remember from the Gorgias?
I feel like, wasn't he like against rhetoric?
Yeah. Plato thought that rhetoric,
Like, didn't he do like that interview or whatever, going back and forth?
yeah, he's got that back and forth dialogue with Gorgias the rhetorician, right? In which he essentially gives Gorgias enough rope to hang himself, right? So for Plato, rhetoric was a morally suspect counterfeit of philosophy. Right. Instead of actually trying to get at the truth, Plato argues, a rhetorician argues that there is no truth and tries to produce only belief. Now, Aristotle, Plato's student, believed that rhetoric was a morally neutral tool, right? That it was useful to be able to convince the masses of a particular position, right? And so he was primarily interested in splitting up and defining the various parts of an argument in order to help one learn to argue more effectively, right? And he also believed that the true position, or the position that was closer to truth and justice, would naturally tend to win out over the false, right? So which of these ideas do you think Douglas would be closer to? Who do you think he would be more in agreement with, Plato or Aristotle? Okay. Why have you chosen Aristotle? Or was this just a random 50-50 and you...
Because the convincing part, I don't know, like...
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, the slave was able to, convince the master, and I think, Douglas thought that was
Yeah.
cool.
In this case, right, the morally just argument wins out, right?
Mhm.
And achieves the desired result, right? So not only does rhetoric actually get someone something here, it's actually effective, right? It is also effective in this case for advancing justice, right? For sort of creating a better outcome. So yeah, learning how to argue effectively seems to Douglas like a very important kind of thing, right? Learning how to use your words to achieve desired effects. In the same book, I met with one of Sheridan's mighty speeches on and in behalf of Catholic emancipation. These were choice documents to me. I read them over and over again with unabated interest. They gave tongue to interesting thoughts of my own soul, which had frequently flashed through my mind and died away for want of utterance. The moral which I gained from the dialogue was the power of truth over the conscience of even a slaveholder. What I got from Sheridan was a bold denunciation of slavery and a powerful vindication of human rights. The reading of these documents enabled me to utter my thoughts and to meet the arguments brought forward to sustain slavery. So, on the positive side of the ledger here, right? What does this reading give him that he lacked before?
More like confidence.
Okay,
His emotions or
Oh.
expression.
Made him start thinking.
Makes him start thinking. It gives him confidence, right? But what is it that's giving him this confidence, right? What does he have now that he didn't have before? Okay, yeah, he's got a book. We're laughing, right? But that's thinking along the right lines, right? We're thinking about like what he's getting from the book, right?
Knowledge.
Yeah, knowledge in particular here.
The truth.
Yeah, knowledge, truth, and the book isn't telling him anything he hadn't already thought before, right? He said, like, these were ideas he'd already had. What does the book give him? They gave tongue to interesting thoughts of my own soul, which had frequently flashed through my mind and died away for want of utterance.
I didn't see that.
Bottom of page 24. So when he was having these same thoughts himself, why were they simply dying away? What was he not able to do? What did he not have?
He didn't have the education to further those thoughts.
Yeah, and in particular, he didn't have the language, right? So what these books are doing, they're not just expanding his knowledge, right?
His language.
They're also expanding his language. Yeah, they're giving him a vocabulary that he can use to make these kinds of arguments, right? And this notion of words and the importance of words, the importance of vocabulary, is, I think, another theme that runs through most of this, right? As we see when he's talking about the word abolition, right? How does he have to learn what abolition is? What can't he do to learn the meaning of this word?
Ask somebody.
Yeah, he can't ask somebody what it means, right?
He has to learn it through context clues.
Exactly, yeah. Even, he manages to sneak a peek at the dictionary, right? And that's no help either, right? Yeah. It's like, that, I found it was the act of abolishing, but then I did not know what was to be abolished, right? This is just like this word that he hears his master and his friends talking about all the time, right? As something negative, as, something that they, for which they blame everything that goes wrong.
Well, of course they want that.
Yeah. Right? What is it? He says, if a slave ran away and succeeded in getting clear, or if a slave killed his master or set fire to a barn or did anything very wrong in the mind of a slaveholder, it was spoken of as the fruit of abolition. So, yeah, the only way he can figure out what this word he's heard means is through context. Right? He gets that one piece from the dictionary, though it's not a very helpful piece. And then through this other Baltimore newspaper, he is able to figure out what this means, right? So the reason I bring this up is because this relates to this idea of having the right vocabulary as necessary for being able to form your ideas and form your arguments, right? If you can't put those ideas into language, or if the words you're hearing mean nothing to you, then you can't argue for, say, your own emancipation.
And he also had enough vocabulary to figure out what the definition of abolition is.
Yeah, I mean, his whole education here is built on resourcefulness, right? He knows that he has more to eat than some of the little white boys in the neighboring street, right? So he offers them bread in exchange for them helping him improve his reading skills, right?
And I love how he tricks people into writing stuff. He's like, hey, I'm going to write this. And
Uh-huh.
he does. He gets them to write the whole alphabet. I thought that was pretty
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, and this is about kind of using what's available, right? If the usual means of education are closed to you, right? You use what's in your environment. You use what's present. You use what you have access to in order to get what you need. So that's really about all I wanted to say about this. Do you guys have any questions or comments or anything else? We started a couple minutes early, so I'm going to let you go a couple minutes early.
I'm good.
Okay, we're all set. I should never say we're finishing, because then everybody says, let's go. Yeah. All right, so we'll see you on Tuesday, and read the Virginia Woolf for that.